Hi, when talking about scuba diving, what comes to your mind first? Is it the endless blue ocean? Or maybe it is the fish swimming through around you? Or it is possible of those colorful coral reefs? And for some people, when they talk about scuba diving, it's the most unforgettable moment, the first breath taken under the water. It is a feeling both unnatural and magical. Scuba diving takes people to a different world that we can explore underneath the water. And also, scuba diving is a very important tourism activities in Queensland. Now, let's begin to take a close look at scuba diving in Queensland. Because before we can talk about liability, we need to understand the size and the importance of the industry itself. The Great Barrier Reef is not just a natural wonder, it is one of the main drivers of Queensland tourism economy. In 2022, after the border reopened from the pandemic, the reef welcomed around 2.03 million visitors. Now, roughly half of those people engaged in some form of underwater activities, whether that's snorkeling or scuba diving. That means we're looking at nearly 1 million people putting on masks, fins, and tanks in a single year. And fast forward to 2023, the number remains strong, about 2.13 million reef visitors, again, about 1 million participants in diving or snorkeling. And in 2024, the momentum grew even further with approximately 2.34 million total visitors and thereabouts 1 to 1.2 million divers participate. That's really interesting here is that the majority of the visitors, about 75%, come from domestic travelers. So, while international tourism do play a role, Australians themselves are keeping the industry alive and thriving. So how about the money? Tourism statistics bundled scuba together with border reef activities. But if we focus on diving tourism segment specifically, the numbers are striking. In 2022, the industry was climbing out of COVID. Scuba-related expenditures in Australia valued roughly at 200 million US dollars. Queensland accounts for about 90% of that total, so that's about 180 millions flowing to one state. By 2023, the number has grown to 227 millions, and in 2024, it's projected to surpass $250 million. That's a compound annual growth rate about 11% faster than many other tourism sectors. But the real picture is even larger when you consider the whole reef economy, taking into account the trade packages, hotels, transportations, gear rentals, and all spending tied to reef tourism. The Great Barrier Reef generates an estimated 5.7 to 6.4 billion Australian dollars annually. And there's a key point, about 90% of that tourism driven. So the health of reef and the success of scuba diving operations directly translates into billions of dollars for Queensland economy. Of course, governments are paying attention to this. In 2022, tourism overall contributed about 2.8 billion Australian dollars in direct tax revenue across federal, states, and the local levels. The reef and the marine share of that is estimated about $500 million. By 2023, those tax revenue has grown to 3.1 billion, with the reef component still hovering in the 530 million range. On the top of that, every full day visitor pays the environmental management charge about $7 to $8 per person. Between 2023 and 2024 alone, that adds up $20 million. Embarked specifically for reef conservation and management. So, what does all this tell about us? Scuba diving in Queensland is not just a niche hobby. It is a mass participation activities with over 1 million participants annually. It generates hundreds of millions in direct revenue and supporting a multi-billion-dollar reef economy. It also delivers hundreds of millions of tax contribution each year. In other words, it is the economy house or the economic powerhouse of Queensland. And this is exactly why liability matters. Whenever you have this scale of participation involving physical risks in an unpredictable natural environment, legal responsibility cannot be afterthought. Think about it. When a diver goes down with an instructor, when a tourist books a lifeboat charter, or even when someone takes part in an introductory dive or exploratory dive, there are layers of potential risks: equipment malfunctions, operator negligence, environment hazards. All of this can lead to injury, death, and of course, some of the psychological impacts, and eventually ended up with litigation and the financial consequences. So if we want to sustain this economic powerhouse or this thriving industry in Queensland, the conversation cannot just be about marketing the reef or counting visitor numbers. It must also include a serious look at scuba diving liabilities. How responsibility is shared between operators, instructors, insurers, and the government regulators. Only by understanding these managing liability, we can create an industry that is sustainable and healthy. However, scuba diving inherently involves risks: physical, environmental, and operational. Diver Alert Network's 2024 Fast Fact Report highlights that diving incidents, including injuries and fatalities, remain a concern globally, with Australia seeing a similar trend. In Queensland, recent data underscore the same findings. Between 2024 and 2025, multiple fatalities occurred. That includes a 45-year-old male had died due to the scuba diving at Wolf Rock in June 2024. A tourist drowning at Ribbon Reef in September of 2024, and at the New Year's Day of 2025, there were 2 incidents. So, many tragedies often involve cardiac events, decompression sickness, or environmental factors like current. Those issues can lead to negligence claim against operators. Research based on the data from Australia Bureau of Statistics and WorkSafe Queensland reveals a broader impact. Diving injuries range from physical harm such as biotrauma or drowning to rare psychiatric losses such as PTSD from near misses. And of course, economic losses, including lost wages or huge medical bills. Diver Alert Network's annual report estimated about 1,000 diver-related incidents yearly in Australia, with cardiac events accounting for 25% of fatalities, primarily in older divers. Post-COVID, this risk has been amplified due to delayed medical screens and increased adventure tourism demand. The economic toll on the stakeholders is significant. For injured divers, often Queenslanders or tourists domestically, the cost includes medical treatment, rehabilitation, and lost income, potentially running into hundreds of thousands debts. For operators, the negligence claim exacerbates this economic loss. For example, the insurance premium has surged 20 to 50% post-COVID. This has led to business closure, reduced diver offerings, and defensive practice like overly restrictive waivers, which deter participations and harm the community access to recreation. If we look at the current law, Queensland's negligence regime for personal injuries is primarily governed by the Civil Liability Act 2003. For recreational scuba diving, under this regulation, it classified as a dangerous recreational activities under Section 18 due to the significant risk of physical harm. The CLA interacts with Personal Injury Proceeding Act 2002 for pre-court process and the Australian Consumer Law for service guarantees. And the recent amendments like Civil Liability Regulation 2025 and the Justice and Other Legislation Amendment Act 2023 focus on the indexation of the monetary amount, such as damage cap, but leave the core element like breach and causation alone. The CLA established negligence via duty of care, breach, causation, and damage. Operator owe a duty under Section 9 of CLA to take reasonable care against foreseeable risk. And the foreseeable risk and the reasonable care has been described by the 2024 Recreational Diving Code of Practice. For scuba operators, this means evaluating, supervision, training, and warning. The Code of Practice provides evidential guidance, but compliance isn't a complete shield. More importantly, breach applications are inconsistent. In Vary and the Wyong Council 2005, the High Court upheld no breach for obvious diving risk, emphasizing personal responsibilities. Similarly, in Mulligan and the Coffs Harbour City Council dismissed the liability for submerged hazard as obvious. However, in Lawman and the Zerab 2006, breach was fined for negligence boat supervision during water activities for picking up the scubas. But judicial viability persists. What consists of a reasonable care in a dynamic ocean environment? This uncertainty forced operator into costly defenses. As seen in 2024 WorkSafe fines for dive abandonment and aquatic fails. ACL Section 139A limits waivers for reckless conduct, overriding CLA's protection and creating overlaps. Causation under Section 11 is equally problematic. It requires factual and legal test, which is but for, and the scope of liability. In scuba claims, proving an operator's breach caused harm is complicated by the inherited complicated factors involved with the scuba diving, such as diver panic, current, weather, and etc. March and Strammer 1991 allows multiple causes, but Strong and Woolworth 2012 demands a precise linkage. What makes it a little bit more difficult is the psychiatric loss. Tame and the New South Wales 2002 requires recognized illness under CLA Section 30. At the same time, the economic losses is also capped per the Schedule 2. Now, let's break down the real problem with causation here. it's where the things get tricky for operators. You see, proving that a breach actually caused the injury demands a ton of evidence, and that is a huge burden. For instance, in case like Guts and Horizon Charter from 2013, which is often referenced by the Diver Alert Network, the court had to tease apart inherent diving risks, like unpredictable ocean conditions, from any operator slip-ups. The same goes for Fowler and Morales in 2006, where they wrestled with the idea what truly links the accident to negligence. Take Embry and McNally from 2008. Here, the contributory negligence cut down the compensation award, which is fair enough. However, the long delays from the Personal Injury Proceeding Act just ballooned the legal costs for everyone involved. Then we got Chettico and Edith Cowan University in 2005, which shine a light on what reasonable breach standards look like. However, without a crystal clear guidance provided by the law, the operators are usually left guessing at the outcomes. It's like the old Wyong-Share Council and the Shirt case from 1980, which sets the baseline for duty of care, which is foreseeable risk and all. But even that leaves too much room for interpretation in a fast-paced diving scenario. Let's get straight to the point. Scuba operators on the Great Barrier Reef and other popular diving locations across Queensland are under enormous pressure. On one side, they're running boats, checking tanks, and supervising divers who may have never even put a snorkel before. On the other side, they face the Civil Liability Act and the uncertainty of what happens when something goes wrong. The case law show how unpredictable the courtroom can be. In Lumin and Zurab 2006, the operator was held liable for inadequate supervision. However, in Vary and Wyong-Shire Council 2005, the defendant was excused because of the risk was considered obvious. The inconsistent decision gave the operator a feeling, and it's become a coin toss game. Therefore, the first reform idea focused on breach of duty. Section 9 of the Act tells the operator to act reasonably, but this is too vague. In diving community, there is a 2004 Recreational Diving Code of Practice. This code already explained what reasonableness should look like. Operators are expected to inspect equipment, supervise dives, and prepare emergency plan. However, the problem is that even if they follow the code perfectly, they can still face a court action. So a better approach is to amend Section 19 so that if an operator complies with the code, they are presumed not to have breached their duty. Think of it as a legal safety net for the operators. Other states like New South Wales already had something similar under the Section 5.0 of its Civil Liability Act that protects professionals who follow accepted industry standards. So Queensland operators deserve the same level of protection. The second issue is causation. This is where the law asks whether the operator conduct actually caused the injury. The Civil Liability Act relies on the but-for test, but in diving case, this is often impossible to apply clearly. Imagine a diver panicking at the depth, or a sudden current push some divers into a coral, Was the injury caused by the operator's supervision, or it's by natural force that nobody could control? Courts have struggled with this problem. In Strong and Werewolf case shows how strict the link has to be. However, in Gates and Horizon Charter in the United States illustrate the same difficulties, which court unable to decide whether injury came from operator fault or natural risk. Therefore, the solution is to add clear guidance under Section 11. Unless there is a gross negligence, such as ignoring a diver in obvious distress, courts should assume that inherent risks like jellyfish sting or rough waves are not the operator's fault. This creates certainty for judges and operators as well as divers, while still holding the business accountable if they are truly act carelessly. The third idea about the reform suggestion is a hybrid compensation scheme. The concept is straightforward. For smaller injuries such as ear, barrel trauma, or minor cuts, claim up to $50,000 would be paid quickly from an insurance pool. This pool could be funded jointly by all operators across the Queensland and the government. There would be no need to fight in the court. However, for serious negligence such as failing to respond to a drowning diver, the traditional fault-based system would remain in place. This approach combines two standards of tort theory. The corrective justice says that negligence operator must pay for the harm or damage they have caused. Distributive justice says that the cost of minor but unavoidable risk should be shared across the industry. The New Zealand Accident Compensation Corporation provides a working model for how it can function. For Queensland, it could mean fewer lawsuits, lower premium, and a faster payment to injury divers. Insurance premium can have already risen sharply since COVID. North Queensland operators pay over $3,000 for basic coverage, much higher than the national average. A hybrid scheme could save them over $1 million each year, which means more money available for staff, boats, and reef protections. Under this hybrid scheme, divers also benefit. Instead of waiting years for pre-court procedure under the Personal Injuries Proceeding Act, they would retrieve thousands of dollars of medical cares or $50,000 for rehabilitations almost immediately. It is a win for the operator, diver, and the diving industry. So in the end, let's have a review. So the term of reference A is addressed by clarifying the breach and the correlation through legislative amendments. Term of reference B is addressed by the ensuring that injured people get fair and fast compensation. Term of reference C is covered by reducing costs so that the system remains sustainable for business and taxpayers. Term reference D is met by building the hybrid model that balances quick no-fault claims with accountability for serious negligence. So with those changes, Queensland, if we do not conduct those changes, Queensland risks losing more than legal. Without these changes, Queensland risks losing more than legal clarity. Without these changes, Queensland risks losing more than legal clarity. We would risk losing the future of the adventure tourism on the Great Barrier Reef and other diving locations. That means fewer divers, fewer visitors, and fewer jobs. But if we implement those changes, however, we'd be able to set national standards, and also we can create a better diving environment that the tourists from the home and abroad can appreciate our wonder of the reefs.